They switched off the internet. Then came the screams, the silence, and the bodies. For days, no one knew what was happening in Tanzania until now. In this video, I have compiled a report of exactly what happened on the days after Tanzania switched off its internet until when it switched them back on after President Samia Suluhu has been sworn in as the president of Tanzania. Well, this is Bonafide. If you haven't subscribed, kindly subscribe and hit that notification button so that when I release something new on the Tanzanian elections, you get notified as soon as possible.
Were the elections credible?
No. By all means, no.
Well, this was deemed to be a very special election in Tanzania because it was unprecedented that Tanzania would once go to the polls to elect a president from Zanzibar. But Mama Samia Suluhu has been the president of Tanzania in the past term and was seeking a re-election. The heavy hand of the government could be seen well in even during the campaigns, as anyone who will critique the president or the Chama cha Mapinduzi, the ruling party of Tanzania, will either be disappeared, arrested, or abducted by government officials. And this was seen even as Tundu Lissu, the chairperson of Chadema, the official opposition party of Tanzania, was arrested. His vice, John Heche, also got arrested, and any other person who will raise their voice against the government of the day, talk about Humphrey Polepole, will be disappeared by the security apparatus of Tanzania. Well, after the banning of the official opposition parties from participating in the general elections, the government had a hunch that these elections are not going to be like any other experienced in Tanzania. The voting day proceeded amid heavy restrictions. Protests erupted in Dar es Salaam and other cities as people reacted to exclusions and arrests. And in many other polling stations, people stayed in their homes and protested to vote. Actually, many polling stations did not see any person going to cast their ballots because of the arrests of the opposition figures and the banning of the political parties from participating in that vote. As protests continued in different parts of the country and in major cities around Tanzania, a nationwide internet outage began on that election day. Major mobile data or connectivity and social platforms were disrupted by the government, and international observers described this as a deliberate digital blackout. The African Commission and NetBlocks flagged the outage. And remember, on this day, international observers were not allowed to observe the elections in Tanzania, and international media was also not allowed to get into the country to cover the elections that were ongoing. What had initially started as small isolated protests and demonstrations in different parts of Tanzania now spread into major towns. Talk about Dar es Salaam, talk about Mwanza, talk about Arusha, and more people started joining these protests. Security forces used tear gas, and according to multiple reports, live ammunition started to be used in attempts to disperse crowds. Human Rights Watch and the UN Rights Office reported the use of lethal force and urged investigations at that point. We're talking about early stages where many people started to join these protests, and it could be seen as a considerable force against the government officials, against the police officers. At this point, we were reporting that the police officers had been overwhelmed and the military was now being deployed into different towns and cities in Tanzania. In the evening of 30th of October 2025, there were early casualty counts coming in from Chadema, the official opposition party that had been barred from contesting in these elections. They claimed that hundreds had been killed as reported in hospitals. So what Chadema did was to take tallies from different hospitals as people who were critically injured were taken to hospitals. Now Chadema went to these hospitals and verified the reports of people who were injured and people who were reported dead from the protests that were erupting in different parts of Tanzania. Now, according to the reports that were given by Chadema, hundreds had already lost their lives by the second day of the protests in Tanzania. And just as it seemed as if the government was getting overwhelmed by the protests that were happening across different parts of the country, the government invoked severe measures and commands in its security apparatus because on the 31st of October 2025, Tanzanian authorities imposed curfews in major urban areas and intensified roadblocks and checkpoints. Army units were reported on different streets in some cities, and the international human rights called the protests severe and warned of arbitrary arrests, disappearances, and excessive force. At this point, Amnesty International also reported of electricity disruptions which complicated efforts to verify incidents and locate missing people. This is the day that many people lost their lives in the hands of the government of the day. Because it is during this time when the lights were off, the internet was off, and Tanzania was totally dark. The only operations that were going on in the country is to suppress the protests. The innocent people who are fighting for representation in their country lost their lives because of the government orders that were given to the security apparatus to turn their guns against their own people. Allegations of bodies being hidden started to emerge. Opposition figures alleged that the security forces were secretly disposing of bodies and that the true death toll was far higher than official figures. They pointed to hospital reports, as earlier explained, from multiple regions to back their claims. The Tanzanian government rejected many outside reports as exaggerated and unverified and publicly warned against misinformation. This is the time that some officials in the government started blaming, quote unquote, foreign elements for disrupting the peace in Tanzania. The police also released warnings about foreigners allegedly entering the country to foment unrests. The internet now got partially restored, partially because there are still some restrictions on social media use in Tanzania, even as we speak right now. But this restoration of the internet came with a stern warning from the security apparatus in Tanzania. In that video, the Tanzania police is warning its citizens against sharing of videos and pictures of what happened during the dark days when there was no internet and there was a deliberate shutdown of power in Tanzania. But despite that warning, video evidences and photos circulated the internet of exactly what happened during those days when Tanzania was on a lockdown deliberately by the government to suppress protests in the country. And even as INEC, the electoral body in Tanzania, surprisingly counted 31 million votes in just a few hours, and even as Samia Suluhu was hurriedly sworn in as the president of Tanzania, the government still maintains that the protests in Tanzania were as a result of foreigners who went into the country and caused unrest in the country. In fact, the reports from Tanzania point to a ruthless post-election sweep targeting foreigners, especially Kenyans. Witnesses saying that soldiers stopped vehicles, searched everyone, forced people to lie on the tarmac with guns cocked, and claimed foreigners may only stay a week, even with valid 30-day permits. Some are even being fished from their hotel rooms because of this policy that the government has now adopted, that it is the foreigners who caused the unrest in the country. Videos have also emerged of ballot stuffing and other election irregularities that happened during the elections in Tanzania. Well, I will continue to keep you informed and updated of the latest of what will come out from Tanzania regarding this past election, as well as what will happen right now as the government is heavily condemned by different international media stations and different bodies regarding the loss of lives that has happened in the country. Keep it bona fide.